Hello, this is Steve San Angelo of the SRSRockReport.com website and YouTube channel, and I'm here again with a new video update. Now, we're seeing some interesting price action in the precious metals. Silver shot up very quickly to 1975. I spoke about that in a past video on silver big price moves ahead. We hit 1975, but nothing goes up in a straight line. And on Thursday, the silver price corrected almost 90 cents. And then when it traded earlier today, in Friday morning, it was down 50 cents. Half an hour later, it was actually up. And I just checked at close, it was about 55 cents lower. So we're seeing some volatile movements in the price of the precious metals. But I wanted to focus this video on what I call the China silver wildcard. And I say wildcard because it could really impact the market and silver price moving forward. And there's two reasons I'll explain that. And lastly, towards the end, what's next for the silver price? Now, before I get into the Chinese silver wildcard, I want to compare the silver price action, what's happening into the markets, what precious metals investors are competing against. Even though we focus on market manipulation, there's a lot happening in the markets. Investors are looking at other things in precious metals. Now, if we look at the price action of silver back in 2010, and this was the beginning of September, it was trading at $17.50 an ounce. And in 8 months, it shot up all the way to $50. That's 185% increase in that 8-month period. Now, recently, from low to high, silver is only up 38%. But if you were a trader, just looking at the silver price chart, you don't really care about silver, you don't know about silver, you would say, well, silver is in a bubble here. It's overbought, it's due for a correction. Now, that's one way of looking at it. But then there's the other fundamental value of silver, and that's looking at silver as a store of value. And that's comparing it against all the massive debt, derivatives, money printing, and now zero interest rates or lower, negative interest rates. So was silver in a bubble at 50? Well, not really, but that price won't be realized in the future, and I'll explain that in upcoming videos. But if we just look here and see that traders look at silver in a bubble because it went up 185%. Well, if we look at the next chart, what's going on with Roku? Roku is up a mind-blowing 530%. In 8 months, the same period. It was trading at $27 a share at the end of 2018, and it has skyrocketed all the way up to 170 at the end of August. Now, is Roku worth 170? I don't think so. I don't see how it is, but that's what the market is pricing. And this is the insane valuations we're seeing. Now, for those who don't know what Roku is, basically it's just a streaming content platform. Now, Netflix, they are a provider of content. Not only do they provide content, they also have original series and movies. So let's look at Roku and see why it's worth $170 a share. Well, when the results came out, quarter two results came out on August 7th at the end of trading, after trading ended. The next day, it shot up $21. And the reason for that is what the crazy hype that the company is putting out, publishing. Net revenue of $250 million, up 59% year over year, and platform revenue up 86% year over year. And if you really want to see a ridiculous metric, gross profit of $114 million, up 47% year over year. Well, there was no profit. This is the profit before any expenses. That's ridiculous. If we look down here, Roku has lost $10.4 million. Now, a good analyst friend of mine, he says that you shouldn't really compare year over year. What's better is quarter to quarter, comparing quarter to quarter. Now, it is true that the total revenue for Roku increased 59% if we compare it to the second quarter of 2018. But if we compare it to the fourth quarter of 2018, it's actually lower by 25 million. And worse yet, the total expenses right here were 107 million. They've ballooned to 125 million. With 25 million less in revenue. So that's why they're losing money. So why is Roku worth 170 million? Well, let's compare it to Netflix. Well, this table comes from Guru Focus, and I subscribe to them. It costs a pretty penny, but it's well worth the service in its weight in gold. Now, they have all this information on one page. It's very easy to see. And if we go, I don't have 2003, but if we go back, we could see that Netflix was earning about 500 million in 2004. And then by 2010, it had gone up to 2.1 billion. And we could see it was had a net income of 22 million in December 2004, and it shot up all the way to 161 million. So we would think its stock price would be very high. Well, if we look at this, and I originally had stock charts, but they don't take into account what happens with stock splits. Well, Netflix started trading at $15. It did shoot up over 2 years to 73. Then they did a 2-to-1 stock split. And then it remained low. It wasn't until 2010, 7 years later, did Netflix finally reach $170 a share. But that's based on 2.16 billion in revenues. So how does Roku go from $27 to $170 in 8 months with 250 million in revenue and 10 million in loss? I just don't see it, but this is what precious metal investors need to understand. This is what they're competing against. I call this price action .com on steroids. I believe Roku's price is going to collapse at some point because it's just not worth that kind of valuation, especially during an economic downturn. But let's start talking about the subject matter of the Chinese silver wildcard. And the first part of the equation was this article written by Alistair McLeod back on July in Gold Money. It's a whale is accumulating silver futures. Now, I'd recommend my followers to check out Alistair's as well as other analysts' articles at Gold Money because they do an excellent job. They focus on the details of the facts and the data. And unfortunately, there's too much hype and sensationalism being put out by the precious metal community. And I want to thank some commenters, new subscribers of the SRS Rock Report YouTube channel, because they put out some positive comments saying that they appreciate they came over and watched the videos because I put out content based upon facts and data and leave the sensationalism and hype to other websites. But I just want to condense this article. A lot of people in the precious metal community and analysts were suggesting that JP Morgan was the big silver short. However, Alistair believes that they weren't the silver short. They were working for their clients, which is the People's Bank of China. Now, here we see the change from bear to bull. In this case, the client, the People's Bank of China, would be an ongoing buyer of physical silver. In the past, silver prices have been suppressed in futures market by selling enough futures, that's shorting, to cover doré and silver-bearing base metal ore shipments. Doing business this way would have been a significant benefit to China. None of this explains why a substantial long position appears to have now materialized on the COMEX. Instead of selling futures, that's shorting, to suppress the price, our market whale appears to have turned buyer. Buying enough to cover China's annual silver imports, I'll get to that in a minute, the equivalent of about 43,000 COMEX contracts. Clearly, the new strategy is to hedge against rising prices instead of suppressing the silver price. So I agree with Alistair. I do believe China has been what was the silver short using JP Morgan. But now, because they believe the silver price is going to go higher, instead they are going long. They are buying future contracts because they want to hedge their silver imports on rising silver prices. That's one aspect. And it makes more sense when you see the following charts. Now this chart shows total Chinese silver imports and domestic mine supply in 2018. I'm going to first concentrate on the silver imports and then I'll talk about the mine supply. In 2018, according to the World Silver Survey, excellent document report, they said that China imported 201 million ounces, but it was contained in base metal concentrate, copper, lead, and zinc. 14 million ounces was Chinese silver bullion imports. They didn't give a figure for doré bars, but we could see that most of the imports of silver for China came in contained base metal concentrate. Now, why is that important? Well, if we look at the U.S. silver imports, and they import a lot of silver, this is a table directly from the USGS. We could see in 2018, U.S. imported virtually nothing, a lot of dashes here, is silver in the form of concentrates. Most of it was bullion, 3,750 metric tons, and doré bars were over 1,000 metric tons. And the reason for that, the Western countries are no longer really processing concentrates because of environmental reasons. So it switched over to China. China has ramped up, opened more facilities, and they're processing a lot more base metal concentrates. That's how they get their silver. So if we look at this chart, it's China versus U.S. silver imports, 2018. Again, we can see that 201 million ounces was from China's silver base metal concentrate, and only 14 million was in silver bullion. Again, I don't have that figure for doré bars, but we could see most of U.S. imports were silver bullion, 120 million ounces and 35 million ounces of doré bars. And doré bars are almost silver, but there's still some imperfections in it that they refine out. So here we could see that total Chinese silver imports in this data was 215 million ounces. Most of it was from that silver base metal concentrate, and U.S. silver imports were 155 million, mostly from bullion. Now, I'll explain why this is important, but I first want you to look at the global silver production, which according to the World Silver Surveys, it looks like silver has peaked at 894 million ounces in 2015, and it has slowly declined. And I believe in 2019, it's going to fall even further to 850 million ounces, and it might even be less. It may be in the 840 million ounce range. Now, that means something, because if we go back to 2015, when we had peak silver production, 30% of it came from primary silver mines. And that's these blue bars. So, but what we could see over the next 4 years, it's been falling. In 2018, primary silver mining production is now only 26%, where 61% is a byproduct of copper, lead, and zinc. And the orange here shows you the copper percentage. The rest is from zinc and lead. Now, we'll start to see what's happening here when we look at these next two charts. This is a breakdown of byproduct silver production from various regions in the world for 2018. Asia, which is mostly China, 89% of its silver production, mine supply, is a byproduct of copper, zinc, and lead. 63% is from Central America and South America. They get 63% as a base metal byproduct. The rest of the world is 59%, and the North America, which includes Canada, the US, and predominantly Mexico, 40% of its mine supply is a byproduct of copper, zinc, and lead production. Now, this is very important. It all comes down to this chart. This is a breakdown of primary silver production from various regions in the world, 2018. Asia, only 3% of their mine supply comes from primary silver miners. In Central and South America, 22% comes from primary mines, 30% for the rest of the world, and North America, again, mostly Mexico, 45% of their mine supply in that region comes from primary silver mines. Now, this all comes together now for what I call the silver wildcard due to this chart. If we first look at Chinese silver domestic mine supply, according to the World Silver Survey, China produced 150 million ounces last year. But about 89–90% was a byproduct of base metal mining. So if we look at the total, 330 million ounces total Chinese silver imports and mine supply. Of the 330 million ounces, about 300 million ounces comes from domestic byproduct of base metal mining, and the imports, 201 million ounces, comes from silver contained in base metal concentrate. So what I'm trying to explain here, the Chinese market is heavily reliant upon getting its supply of silver as a byproduct of base metal mining in its domestic mining production as well as its imports. So when there's a downturn in the global economy, and that's coming, what's going to be impacted the most is the base metal mining industry, copper, zinc, and lead. So the Chinese are most at risk when there's an economic downturn, because that's where they get most of their supply, either domestically or imports. So this, to me, is a major wild card moving forward, and I believe it's going to be very bullish for the silver price. Okay, I've got a few last charts here. I just want to quickly go over the silver price. This was as of Thursday. I didn't include Friday's trading, but again, we could see on the daily chart, silver, once it broke above this 725, 750 range, it shot up to 1975 very quickly. Then on Thursday, it fell 88 cents, and it continued to fall more on Friday. So where is the silver price going? Well, if it continues to correct, I believe these are the next important levels. 1725 here, and then 1620. I've mentioned that before. Now, we don't know if silver is going to continue to correct lower, but if it does, I'm just warning, we shouldn't be surprised. Unfortunately, there's so much hype. They think, well, the bullion banks are coming in and they're slamming the markets. Well, a lot of traders that bought, they're selling off now. They're taking profits. So this is a natural part of the correction phase. But however, this 1550, I put it in red, this is the ultimate low. For silver to remain in an upward positive trend, it should not fall below at 1550, and I don't believe it will do so. Whoops. I just want to quickly show you the weekly chart. Here, it's overbought on the weekly chart, and this is as of Thursday. When it went above that 1850 level, it shot up all the way to 1975, and it's come back all the way down. This is kind of a topping pattern, so we could see it continue to sell off. And let me show you the next chart, which is the monthly chart. Now, before, I said it was very important for silver to break above this symmetrical triangle in the dashed blue line for the last 6+ years. It did that in July. It shot above it. And then it went above the 50-month moving average and the 200 with these lines. It shot way above that. It went to this first resistance level of 1850. And now, why is that important? Well, when silver fell below that 50-month moving average, it's below it ever since. It tried to go above it, but it couldn't. So when it finally pushed above it, that's very good. So for silver to remain in a bullish trend, the silver price has finally experienced a correction. A key level to stay above would be the 50-month moving average of 1637. Now, I've been watching a lot of day trading markets, and when stock prices, when they break above this long-term resistance level, they shoot up. And then what do they do a lot of times? They come back down and retest it. So that 1637 is a possibility. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just warning that this may occur. And lastly, I wanted to show you this chart again because there's some analysts showing that silver on the weekly chart is now very much overbought. It's in this 80 range, and that's true. And it's only been like that like 4 times in the past 20 years. So after it reaches that, it corrects, and we could see a correction. But I also want to show you back in 2010, when it shot up all the way to $30 in that 4-month period, $12.50. Look what it did. It stayed overbought. Even though it corrected up and down, it stayed overbought for 4 months. That is another possible scenario. We don't know. So I just wanted to say, corrections happen. We shouldn't be fearful. If silver price sells off, I gave you some levels that it could sell off, and we shouldn't be surprised if it does. But this is also a possibility. Silver could correct, but we could see it move even higher as it remains overbought. So lastly, I do believe that China is a major silver wild card moving forward. For one reason, as Alistair McLeod has suggested, that China has now gone long silver because it believes the silver price is going higher. That's very bullish for the silver price. They want to protect the price from moving higher. Also, in a little longer term, what we saw with how much China relies upon its silver supply, the majority is from base metal mining domestically as well as its imports. So China is more at risk than anybody else in obtaining its silver supply during an economic downturn. So I believe that's also very bullish for silver moving forward. Well, I want to thank you once again for watching this video. And if you have not yet subscribed to the SRS Rock Report YouTube channel, please consider doing so. Thank you.